A few years ago, I remember talking to a naval enthusiast, and he spoke about the Japanese Soryu-class submarine as if it were, I don't know, a religious artifact.
The pinnacle of engineering.
Exactly. To him, it wasn't just a machine. It was the ultimate expression of monozukuri, that legendary Japanese spirit of craftsmanship, of absolute precision.
Right.
He was describing the mathematical certainty of its fuel efficiency, how it could just vanish into the deep and outlast anything else in the Pacific. In his mind, Japanese engineering was the one thing in an uncertain world you could actually bet your life on.
It's a powerful image. And for a long time, a deserved one.
Well, that's a thing, because then a series of quiet reports started leaking out of the workshops at Kawasaki Heavy Industries, KHI, who make the engines for these things. And that polished image didn't just crack it, well, it dissolved.
It completely fell apart.
It turns out for over 20 years, the so-called perfection wasn't actually coming from the engineering floor. It was coming from the pens of technicians who were manually adjusting the testing equipment.
They weren't fixing engines, as you said. They were fixing the data.
They were fixing the data just to make the fuel efficiency look a little prettier, the fluctuations a little smoother for the Ministry of Defense.
But the part that really gets me isn't just the lie itself, as bad as it is.
No, it's the fallout, or the lack of it. When this whole scandal broke, and we're talking about the literal heart of Japan's underwater deterrent, the core of their defense strategy, the government's response wasn't some total purge or a massive restructuring.
What was it?
It was a 2.5-month suspension.
Wow.
It's the kind of punishment that feels less like a consequence and more like, I don't know, a scheduled coffee break for a corporate monopoly.
A monopoly they can't easily replace, which is the whole problem. The systemic vulnerability is baked right in.
And as investigators dug deeper, it just got more bizarre. They found a trail of slush funds used to buy Nintendo Switches.
Nintendo Switches and luxury gifts for sailors. It's almost a caricature.
It's an absurd attempt to grease the wheels of a relationship that was supposed to be built on honor. So watching the executives do their perfectly choreographed bows of apology, I just had to ask, if the core data of the nation's most advanced weapons has been work of fiction since 2002, where does the engineering end and the theater begin?
And that's the perfect question, because that KHI story, that disconnect between monozukuri and Nintendo Switches, it really highlights a core truth.
Which is?
What we saw at Kawasaki wasn't some isolated ethical failure. It was a symptom, a very visible one, of a systemic crisis running right through Japan's heavy industrial sector.
So KHI is just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly. When you look at the investigations into other major groups, like the Kobe Steel Group, which we're about to get into, the whole story changes. KHI was a problem of defense capabilities, sure, and monopoly, but Kobe Steel. Kobe Steel shows us the deeper institutional rot. We're talking decades of compliance failure, documented right up to the highest ranks. It proves that the transition from craftsmanship to a culture of systemic failure was already complete.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our mission for this deep dive is not just to be shocked by the headlines. We need to move past the absurdity of that 2.5-month suspension for KHI.
Right.
We need to analyze the detailed anatomy of this industrial deception, but within the Kobe Steel Group. Because this investigation, it's the ultimate cautionary tale about how industrial trust gets destroyed.
It's the blueprint, really.
We need to understand exactly how wide this net of misconduct was, how long it lasted, and that timeline is truly staggering.
Yeah.
Why management failed to stop it and what fundamental, expensive, and radical changes they were forced to propose to rebuild that shattered trust. This is how decades of quality assurance can just collapse overnight.
Let's get into it.
When people hear a term like data fabrication, I think the natural instinct is to localize the problem. You know, you picture one rogue engineer, one factory floor mistake.
A single bad apple.
Exactly. But that is absolutely not what happened here. So let's just establish the sheer breadth and depth of this fraudulent network inside Kobe Steel. Because I think understanding the scale is the first step to grasping how deep the institutional rot went.
It's genuinely frightening when you see how ubiquitous it was. This wasn't limited to a single factory or, one specific product line. It was systemic across the entire Kobe Steel Group.
So which divisions are we talking about?
We are talking about their most vital divisions, the aluminum and copper business, the iron and steel business, the machinery business, and then dozens of affiliated group companies.
And these aren't small-time operators.
Not at all. These are names like Shinko Wire, Shinko Metal Products. These are major players. This wasn't a local issue. It was pervasive. The internal culture of deception was just shared horizontally across the whole company.
So to try and map this disaster, The company had to do this colossal internal quality inspection, and they used their Monozukuri planning and promoting department to do it. The irony of using the department named after the very ideal they betrayed is just something else.
It's pretty rich, yeah.
This internal audit covered 100 business locations in total. That's the footprint they were forced to investigate themselves.
And critically, that geographic scope was global. It wasn't just in Japan. This is what really compounded the risk for their customers. Of those 100 locations, 34 of them were overseas.
34? Where?
All over. The US, China, Thailand, South Korea, Malaysia, the list goes on. The fact that they had to check quality data integrity in plants across 3 continents just shows that the failure wasn't unique to Japan. The methodology of corner cutting had been exported right along with the products.
Wow. So the immediate domestic assessment, what did that find?
It confirmed that misconduct took place in 12 out of 66 domestic business locations they surveyed.
So almost 1 in 5 of their critical production facilities in Japan had documented proven instances of fraud.
That's right. And the fallout went way beyond just logistics. When you start quantifying the damage, you see the immense risk they placed on their customers. The investigation confirmed that 525 customers received these affected products.
525. I mean, think about the crisis that triggers. You have 525 companies, major players in auto, aerospace, energy, suddenly having to perform safety verifications on material they were guaranteed was perfect.
It's a nightmare scenario. You're recalling products, you're halting production lines, you're embarking on these complex forensic engineering assessments to check if planes or cars are structurally sound.
An immense effort that just rippled through global supply chains. And the bulk of that work, just confirming that the products were still safe, was only largely completed by March 2018.
That's months of paralyzing uncertainty and massive costs for 525 companies who put their trust in the Kobe Steel name.
And of course, the legal fallout was immediate and severe. It went from an internal corporate disgrace to an international legal crisis almost instantly.
Well, yeah. Kobe Steel announced that one of its U.S. subsidiaries got a subpoena from the United States Department of Justice, the DOJ. So suddenly you're under a criminal investigation by American authorities. This signaled that the fraud was serious enough to be considered a violation of U.S. law, potentially involving fraud against federal contracts or securities markets.
And not just in the U.S., right?
No. Lawsuits for damages were filed in Canada against some of the group companies. This wasn't just a domestic shame. It became an international regulatory crisis that just torpedoed the reputation of Japanese manufacturing.
Okay, but here's where it gets, for me, really wild. And it's where that word systemic truly earns its weight, the timeline. The sheer duration of this absolutely shreds the idea that this was a recent problem caused by, say, short-term market pressure. How far back did this rot really go?
It wasn't just decades, plural. It was verging on half a century.
Half a century.
The investigation found that misconduct in their aluminum extrusion and fabrication plant dated back to no later than the late 1970s.
The 1970s.
The late 1970s, this is so critical because a scandal usually implies a recent failure of oversight. When a practice dates back to the 70s, it means it was taught to multiple generations of employees. It becomes institutional memory.
So the people who started this are probably retired now. They just passed the fraud down as standard operating procedure.
That's exactly what it suggests, the 1970s. That predates most modern quality control. It predates digital records, the internet. It was institutionalized data fabrication being passed down like a craft for 40 years. They were actively deceiving customers before the vast majority of their current executives even started their careers.
It's staggering.
It is. And the misconduct at their Kimoka plant also started no later than the 1970s. Even in copper products, the longevity is astonishing. Copper-rolled products misconduct began no later than the early 1990s. Steel products and sand casting, early 80s and 90s, respectively.
So when the misconduct goes on for that long and affects that many products, what happens inside the company?
The investigators noted that the sheer size of it created this paralyzing organizational fear. It hindered any attempt to stop and correct it. They felt they couldn't stop because the operational disruption, the chaos, would just be too massive.
So it stopped being an ethical failure, and it became a crucial, protected part of the business model. Yeah. The persistence alone just explains why that Monozukuri ideal was so undermined. It wasn't a sudden fall. It was a decades-long decline, hidden by layers and layers of paper.
A well-organized systemic decline.
So if the scale was massive and the duration was decades, we have to look at the mechanics. How did they do this repeatedly without automated systems flagging the fraud? The core misconduct was defined very simply: shipping products that failed to meet customer specs by rewriting or fabricating the inspection results.
Right, and this whole deceptive process was so formalized, so ingrained, that it had its own internal jargon. They called it Tokusai.
Tokusai.
And it's really important to distinguish this from the proper ethical practice, which is called concession.
Okay, what's the difference?
A concession is when a product is slightly out of spec. You tell the customer, they do a safety assessment, and they consent to receiving it, usually at a discount. It's transparent.
It's asking for permission.
Exactly. Tokusai, the Kobe steel version, was shipping those non-compliant products without consent by just inventing or altering the paperwork to say that they were compliant.
So if concession's asking permission, Tokusai is just faking the report card.
Perfectly put.
Let's break down the methods they use then, starting with direct rewriting or falsification. This is where they had real data that showed a failure and they just changed it. Where did this happen?
This was routine at the Mocha plant for their aluminum products, and the perpetrators were the quality assurance staff, the very people whose entire job is to safeguard quality.
The watchdogs were in on it.
They were the problem. When they got inspection results that failed crucial specs, they would simply access the internal system and manually rewrite the data. We're talking critical parameters like tensile strength, yield strength. They were literally digitally hacking their own quality records.
What about in other areas?
Very similar process. In the copper sheet quality control area, staff would change the results on internal documents. Then they'd instruct the line inspectors who are actually entering the data into the system to input the new, altered, compliant numbers. It was a coordinated, multi-step process.
It seems like such a low-tech, high-risk way to commit fraud for so long. You're relying entirely on human silence. But the truly shocking cases seem to be the ones involving fabrication, just making numbers up when the data didn't exist at all.
Right, because the test was never even performed. And those fabrication cases, they highlight the real core problem. The company was consistently accepting orders that they knew exceeded their technical capacity.
Give me an example.
Take the Chofu Works and their copper products. They had customers who needed a spring elastic limit measurement. It's a crucial property. The problem: the plant simply lacked the necessary expensive equipment to take that measurement.
So what did they do? Did they buy the equipment? Did they say no to the order?
Neither. They just removed the process of taking measurement samples from the official work instructions.
They just deleted the step.
They deleted the step. Instead, inspectors were formally told to enter a theoretical spring elastic limit that they calculated using a simple conversion chart.
Oh, come on.
I'm serious. Imagine being that inspector. Your job is precision, but instead of testing the metal, you look up a number on a chart and you sign off on it as real data. They shipped high-precision products based entirely on a theoretical number that was never verified in reality.
They replaced a vital piece of lab equipment with a lookup table and a willingness to lie. That is just astounding. What about fabrication because they were short-staffed?
We see that at the Diane plant. They made specialized castings that needed a leak test for chambers holding gases or fluids. Due to a reported personnel shortage, in November 2010, they just decided to completely halt all leak tests from then on.
But the customers still require the test, right?
Yeah, of course. So the staff just created chart forms that showed the products met the specifications, complete with passing grades, without ever conducting the physical test. They fabricated the entire compliance chain because of a staffing issue.
And some of this fraud was incredibly complex. The can material inspection at the Mocha plant, for instance. It seems like they put a lot of engineering effort into maintaining the lie.
That case is amazing because it shows how sophisticated the data manipulation was. For aluminum can materials, some customers required specific thickness measurements at 3 points left, center, and right. And they expected a certain mathematical relationship, like the center being the thickest.
Yep.
If the actual inspection showed the machinery was slightly off and didn't produce that perfect relationship, the staff would instruct third-party vendors to enter an altered set of values that mathematically recreated the expected falsified relationship on the inspection sheet.
So the effort they put into fabricating perfect results was greater than the effort it would have taken to just fix the machine.
It seems so. And all this administrative effort, knowing which customers got which lie, what the previous lies look like, it was all tracked and institutionalized through one specific damning tool.
What was that?
The existence of the internal Tokusai list. This is one of the clearest signs of how institutionalized it all was. It wasn't a scrap of paper. It was an Excel file.
A spreadsheet of lies.
A spreadsheet of lies. It was used by inspectors, particularly at the Hatano plant. This list meticulously recorded product numbers, customer names, specifications, and the falsified data from prior misconduct.
So why was this list so central to the whole operation?
Because it let inspectors act on their own. They could refer back to prior lies and complete new inspection certificates with falsified data without even consulting quality assurance. It was like a pre-approved menu of successful lies.
So they could say, oh, customer X got this fake number last year and didn't notice. Let's just use that again.
That's exactly how it functioned. It was a tacit, decades-long approval system for ongoing, unauthorized fraud.
Which brings us to the critical question. How did this system, supported by internal lists and executive silence, last for 50 years? It suggests the corporate culture wasn't just flawed, it was perfectly designed to allow this.
That's the primary cause the investigation found. The company consistently accepted purchase orders even when they knew they didn't have the production capacity to meet the specs. They were selling products they knew from the start they might not be able to deliver.
That's a fundamentally broken business model.
It's ethically compromised from day one, and the motive was overwhelmingly economic, especially for the aluminum and copper business. That division had historically low revenue, so there was this intense internal pressure to prioritize production volume and delivery deadlines above all else. Profit and market share were prioritized over quality.
And this pressure led to that critical, deliberate executive decision in May 2017, long after the company had supposedly started looking into its own issues.
That decision just crystallizes the whole mindset. An executive officer who was fully aware that inspection data had been altered for copper products made a deliberate choice not to immediately stop shipping those products.
And his justification was?
His justification was, and I'm quoting the sentiment here, the pressing state of pending orders at the time and the confusion it would cause to customers.
Wait, hold on. The company knows it's shipping non-compliant, potentially unsafe material, and an executive actively decides to let that continue for 4 more months just to protect the delivery schedule.
That is the gravity of the calculation they made.
That sounds less like a flawed management decision and more like, well, criminal endangerment.
Instead of halting the fraud and facing the consequences, he calculated that the immediate damage to delivery schedules outweighed the ethical need to start immediately. He opted to gradually phase out the misconduct over the next 4 months. It shows you that the priority, even then, was protecting the revenue stream, not the customer.
Which brings us directly to the management blind spots. These incidents didn't just pop up in 2017. They were baked in.
They were completely normalized. Top management had what the report calls insufficient quality compliance awareness because they always treated past incidents like ones in 2006 and 2008 as local and particular problems.
So they'd find a problem, put a bandage on it, and pretend the rest of the body wasn't sick.
Exactly. They isolated the failures and never expanded the fixes horizontally across the whole group. They failed to connect the dots, which effectively gave tacit permission for the misconduct to continue everywhere else.
And the awareness of this wasn't hidden from executives.
Yeah.
It was endemic, going back decades.
Oh, absolutely. Multiple executive officers knew. Executive Officer B, for instance, knew about misconduct at the Daeyeon plant from 2009 to 2011 when he was the plant head. He knew about it again at the Mocha plant in 2014, and yet he failed to report it or stop it even after he became the senior executive officer overseeing the entire division in 2015.
His silence allowed it to continue under his watch.
Willful or negligent. It amounts to the same thing. And then you have Executive Officer F, a former officer, whose story shows how this rot became generational.
What did he do?
He was involved in misconduct himself way back in 1983. Then, from 1992 to 1993, he was actively instructing his subordinates to carry out Tokusai. He personally institutionalized the fraud. And even after holding numerous high-ranking positions, including head of the whole business, he never investigated or reported the ongoing misconduct.
So the conclusion is stark. Executives knew, they participated, Or they protected the fraud.
And the organizational structure lacked any way to force action against them.
The sheer longevity of this suggests the organizational structure must have been designed, even accidentally, to insulate the fraud. What was it about the internal organization that let quality assurance fail so spectacularly?
It was deeply insular and functionally compromised. First, the monitoring was weak because quality assurance departments were structurally subordinate to manufacturing departments.
So QA reported to the same people responsible for hitting production targets.
Precisely. There's no way quality will ever win that fight. The company created a mindset where quality issues were entirely entrusted to the plants, so QA wasn't an independent auditor. It was just a service provider to the manufacturing line.
And this insular nature was reinforced by their HR strategy?
Yes, they seldom reassigned people across different business divisions. So former plant managers would frequently become the executive officers of their own divisions. It perpetuated this closed, uncritical, almost incestuous view of quality control. And because the aluminum and copper business was physically distant from the main offices, that isolation was even more pronounced.
And finally, the procedures themselves. We mentioned the manual data entry, but the internal standard setting is this fascinating, perverse incentive structure that actually encouraged them to lie.
This is a subtle but critical point. Misconduct was feasible because data entry was manual, but the motive, the perverse motive, came from establishing overly strict internal standards.
Stricter than what the customer asked for.
Exactly. The company set internal standards for products that were way stricter than the actual customer specifications. So employees were forced to falsify data just to meet the company's internal metrics. It shifted the focus from satisfying the customer to satisfying the company's own needlessly strict benchmark, which created immense pressure to lie.
So the 50-year failure required radical corporate surgery. They couldn't just tweak things. They had to launch this massive, multi-billion-dollar recalibration, starting with a fundamental governance overhaul to break that old boys club.
The first focus was on transparency and monitoring. They immediately resolved to increase the number of independent outside directors to 1/3 or more of the board.
So bringing in outside eyes to break the closed loop.
Exactly, and that's a significant change to boardroom dynamics. But they also targeted the structural issue of insularity in the leadership, where former plant managers could protect their own divisions at the highest levels.
How did they fix that?
They stopped the practice of appointing every division head as a director. Instead, they assigned a limited number of director positions based on broad business categories. This fundamentally changes the board's function from one of just representation to one of strategic oversight.
It prevents the division leaders from having that direct, uncritical seat on the main board. And they created entirely new roles to fill that accountability gap.
Yes, a director in charge of risk management and, crucially, a director in charge of quality assurance, specifically recruited from outside the company.
That's huge.
It's a massive signal that quality assurance is no longer subservient to manufacturing. It's an independent function reporting to the highest levels. On top of that, they established a new quality management department in the head office and an independent quality supervision committee to monitor the cleanup.
Okay, that's the leadership structure. What about the operational side? The emergency measures they put in place to just stop the bleeding, starting in January 2018.
These were practical and immediate. The first was an enforced double check. Upper-level management now had to manually double-check any manually entered test or inspection results. It's a stopgap, but a necessary one.
And they had to fix the vulnerability of the internal systems.
Access control, sweeping restrictions on who could get into the inspection databases. Passwords are now required to edit data, and they're only issued by the independent QA department to a very limited number of people.
And there's a record of changes.
A permanent record. The system now logs all edit history, the data before the change, who changed it, and when. It creates a traceable, unforgiving audit trail. If you change a number, everyone knows.
And they address that perverse incentive, the overly strict shipment standards.
They eliminated internal standards as the basis for shipping decisions, period. Across the entire organization. From now on, they use only customer specifications as the official release criteria. This immediately removes the motive to lie, just to meet some arbitrary internal benchmark.
These are essential immediate fixes. But the permanent solution required a full technological overhaul, right? Eliminating the possibility of manual fraud with a target of March 2020. What did that look like?
The ultimate goal was automation, to entirely eliminate manual intervention. They wanted to automate the data intake from testing equipment directly into the system. So instead of a tester typing numbers from a screen into Excel, which is easy to fake, you have a fiber optic cable that locks the sensor reading into a secure, uneditable ledger.
So you're taking the human element, the part that can lie, completely out of the equation.
That's the goal. The automated data must be uneditable. And where manual input is still unavoidable, it's now layered with double checks and systemic confirmations, making it structurally impossible for one person to lie.
And to address the root cause accepting orders they couldn't fulfill, they had to bake quality verification right into the sales process.
That's the introduction of the design review, or DR approval process. Before they accept any new order, they now have to thoroughly evaluate their own process capability to make sure it matches what the customer needs. If it doesn't, the options are clear. Stop the sale and invest to improve the line, or negotiate a new spec with the customer before the contract is signed.
No more accept the order and hope we can fake the data later.
That's over. And they even changed their core investment calculus, which is arguably the most telling sign of the cultural shift.
How so?
Historically, decisions on funding new equipment were based on the internal rate of return, the IRR, a measure of profitability. This metric made it almost impossible to fund essential quality investments, like new testing devices, because they have a low immediate financial return.
Right.
Kobe Steel revised that standard. Now, they must consider quality risk mitigation in capital expenditure. They can spend money to mitigate quality risks, even if those investments are less profitable. Quality assurance is now defined as a necessary capital expenditure, not a discretionary cost.
Finally, the cultural reset. They had to fix the insular, siloed nature of the organization and address the human fear that kept this going for 50 years.
They started by defining the ultimate priority with a new quality charter. It explicitly states, quality takes priority over everything else. And it clarifies that when the balance among quality, delivery, and cost isn't feasible, quality now takes precedence. No more excuses.
And they systematically attacked that closed organizational structure.
By establishing a system for rotating personnel among divisions, including QA people, the HR department now has to execute mandatory personnel transfers. The goal is to prevent any single division from becoming an uncritical echo chamber like the aluminum and copper business had become.
And the ultimate goal is rebuilding trust by actually listening to the raw voices from the factory floor that were silenced for so long.
Exactly. They launched initiatives like a quality caravan team, in-house experts visiting sites, and promoted regular dialogue between the top management and employees, where executives traveled to sites to speak directly with employees. It's an attempt to create an open workplace where information about risks flows up, rather than being hidden.
So if you had to synthesize the key lesson from all of this, what would it be?
The Kobe Steel investigation reveals that the decline of industrial trust wasn't about a few bad employees. It was a calculated, decades-long outcome of systemic management failure. The fatal imbalance happened because short-term economic goals, revenue, delivery were allowed to completely override the foundational value of reliable, verifiable quality. By prioritizing commercial expediency, management ultimately dissolved the core trust placed in the Monozukuri spirit.
The sheer magnitude and cost of these reforms, restructuring the board, automating every data point across continents, changing how they even think about investment, it just demonstrates the severe price they paid for choosing expediency over integrity. This incident didn't just expose corruption, it necessitated a complete multi-billion-dollar restructuring of how a global manufacturing giant operates, forever redefining the global standard for oversight in manufacturing, where precision and reliability are absolutely critical.